Hello everybody, this is Brian for Breaking Down Security. This is part 2 of our discussion of the recent Kubernetes security audit. It was done by Atreides Partners and Trail of Bits, along with the people you heard from part 1, Aaron Small and Jay Beale. Jay Beale works, of course, at InGuardians up here in the Seattle office, and Aaron Small also is in the Seattle area. They were co-leads as well as on the steering committee to help decide scope of the engagement, what would be tested, etc. Part 2 we're going to discuss some of the CIS benchmarks, what are sane defaults, what works on some container type implementations, don't always work on others. And before we go, I just want to say the BreakSec team had a phenomenal time at DerbyCon this year. We'll talk about it next week, but met a whole lot of great folks. We're hoping to bring some of those speakers onto the show here. And and if you saw anybody at DerbyCon and you were at DerbyCon and you want to see or hear them on our podcast, do not hesitate to reach out to them and mention our show, because we get a lot of our interviews that way, by word of mouth or by people attending conferences and saying, hey, that person would be interesting to have on the show. So we're going to continue our conversation with Aaron and Jay. For the question I asked actually was, and I believe it was fairly rhetorical, I'm going to edit that one out, but it was how important is it to actually patch your Kubernetes instances. So that's where we're going to leave off right now with, I believe it's Aaron's response. So everyone have a great week, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. I shall stand on said soapbox. It's the single most important thing you can do for Kubernetes security. Sure, isolate your metadata server, write good pod security policy, have good network policy, whatever, but patch, just patch.
But Aaron,
so many security fixes in every patch.
Aaron, I work in a large dev environment, and I can't patch my stuff immediately like that because I'm not, our CI/CD is not that CI/CD.
I mean,
treat your clusters like cattle, right? So we've done the treat your containers like cattle. We've done treat your nodes like cattle, and that's sort of where. I think about it this way. Aaron can probably not tell us how much this is the one of the major motivators for Kubernetes. But treat your nodes like cattle. Assume that machines are going to fail, because if you happen to have 2.5 million or so, your failure rate is daily. But beyond that, if we're going to, unless we're going to have patches that are available after more than 3 releases. On something that releases every 3 months, you should just assume that a 1-year-old cluster is already ready to be migrated away from. I will say one of those thought leader things that where it sounds really good, and then you say, how the hell are we going to do that? But I'm treat the clusters like cattle. Be ready to kill them. Be ready to kill that thing off, because by the time it gets to 1 year old, it's infirmed and it's ready to go.
I mean, I was going to say I have a little bit of empathy for the other side of that, though. We have this grand vision for declarative configuration, and we can say, oh, of course, clusters are disposable because I have all my configuration and this 10,000 lines of YAML I threw together. But that actually hasn't been a fully realized vision yet. There are a lot of things that are still tweaks and pokes and things you have to do to make your cluster work. And no, if I'm a huge company who's running 100 transactions per second on my cluster, I can't just nuke it and spin up another one and it'll magically all work. And I do think we'll get there, but we're not there yet. So yeah, I don't have a great answer for my CID isn't all that CI/CD, and it's really hard, except for, I don't know, try harder, because it is really important.
Okay.
I mean, this is a place where I really can feel on both sides of it. There's a side of me that says that one of the answers is that you're just going to have multiple. It's going to have to be the same way we handle rolling certificates, rolling keys. You have to, you have to be able to handle a key expiration. And so that means you're going to have two, right? But then the flip side is, and part of the reason I'm right with you, Aaron, I can feel for everybody is, honestly, most of the clients we look at, when they say they've got a cluster, when we have a cluster, we're ready to test it, and we're ready to get major workloads on it. This is our first big production cluster. We've been working on it for a year, and you're like, it's a year-old cluster. Oh God, the support periods are going to have to get longer, because it really does take companies that long to wrap their brains around and practice with Kubernetes. I mean, Aaron was talking about how big a nerd he was, and how he can build clusters in his home, but it's still hard. And I'll agree with that. If you talk to anybody who's built clusters, they'll generally say, not I built a Kubernetes cluster, but I built a bunch of them, or I built a few. Because it does take building a couple just to get your feet underneath you.
And that year
if you
goes
think
by
about
really
companies
quick.
doing that. Yeah,
it does.
Sure does.
It really does.
So one of the questions that I've got here is the vulnerabilities and findings. It's not a complete list, but a lot of the vulnerabilities appear to have man in the middle kind of issues. Why? I mean, SSH not checking fingerprints, HTTPS connections not checking certs. That seems to be, I don't know, fairly rudimentary for web app testing, or for a network test. Why all of a sudden these seem like rookie mistakes? So why did they show up in something as important as Kubernetes?
I mean, you got to understand, there's got to be 1,000 places in Kubernetes where various authentication and authorization controls exist. And we saw some subset of 37 failures. Everyone makes a rookie mistake, and they're only a rookie mistake when you armchair quarterback the next morning. So I would say that there's a lot of really good security decisions that were made by Kubernetes along the way. But yeah, there are some bugs.
Well, my question was why, they didn't roll their own SSH, or they didn't roll their own HTTPS. Could they have not just called a library that would have done all this stuff for them? I mean, am I wrong in that thinking, or am I just, doing the armchair, security guy kind of thing here?
Well, I mean, I guess I can't call up, off the top of my head exactly which libraries were using in the findings where we found that they weren't validating the client cert. In fact, I'm remembering I was reading it right before I lost all access to technology. I'm calling you from a telephone.
I could probably speak to that a little bit. I mean, but you're asking you're kind of asking a thematic question a little bit, and that's, so like one of the examples was that their gRPC transport seems to all be set to with insecure. So the HTTPS connections, some of them are checking certs, some of them aren't checking certs. I feel like there are probably two ideas that come to mind. The one is something that the Trail of Bits guys talked about, when we, in many of the conversations we had with them after they were done with all their code audit, was, listen, there are so many developers writing so many lines of code. Some of them are using, it was really weird, but some of them are using the central libraries or the central code that the Kubernetes project has even created for something. And others are just creating their own. And it's not just that one of them is creating her own, but another one and another one and another one are each doing it in a different way. And it's just hard to coordinate that with developers. So that's part of my first thought. My other thought on the theme would be that there's definitely this idea, like, how we all, in all of our security work, we all kind of laugh at the vendor said, just stick this behind the firewall and you'll be fine.
Right.
Right. A reasonable answer in some ways, and definitely when you talk to, when you talk to established hypervisor shops, is they say, listen, if your attacker's on the control plane, you've already lost. So some of that may simply be that mindset in the people and developers who are just trying to get this thing built. and have it work without so many people dealing with so many kinds of failure to get a cluster moving, to say, you shouldn't have access to the control plane. I mean, I don't think that's, speaking as an attacker, that's not really the case. The great thing about a default Kubernetes cluster is you usually have a ton of access to the control plane from within every pod. But I think that may have been one of those underlying assumptions.
Okay.
I really like that second point that you made, Jay, initial request from the CNCF. And that does help illuminate where you can't make assumptions like an insecure gRPC connection is acceptable. And it should help point the next, generation of Kubernetes developers to go, oh, wait, this is outside of the trust boundary. So I definitely need to make sure that I validate the cert from the API server so I know who I'm talking to. But that hadn't been done before. And there were a lot of leaps of faith, right? Like, oh, of course I can talk to the control plane. I'm a kubelet, for example.
Right. So, so from a process point of view, is this changing how submissions are being made for code, or when it's being tested, or are you do you have a guideline by you must do certain you must call certain libraries so that way you have the sameness across the entire environment to help clean up some of these disparate issues, or is it just going to continue being like this, and then every year we're going to find either a lot of the same stuff or we're going to find, a ton of different things?
Just from
I hope
GitHub
I hope
so
we do
far.
something cool. Yeah. No, go on, Jay.
Oh yeah, sure. Just from watching GitHub so far, I mean, the sense I've got is it's listen, we just like the report and the report and the findings just started getting wide review very, very, very recently. And so that question is going to be a lot easier to answer in a month, in 4 weeks from now than it is right now. But people are just starting to move into process the findings. I can imagine that one of the steps that might come out of this is somebody basically saying, okay, we got to write a style guide. I mean, the sheer number of contributors to the Kubernetes code base it's pretty substantial. You're not talking about 20 people or 40 people that are really, really easily, just all brought into a room and let's all talk and say what our new coding standards are. Like, I think it's literally going to be that a few people probably form a project to say, okay, this is, just on one of these lower priority issues, which would be, hey, we're not even all using the same libraries, much less configuring them the same way.
Mm-hmm.
That's an effort. Like, that's an effort that's sizable for a group this size.
Cool.
There is a massive number of contributors. There is a massive number of contributors, but there isn't as large a network of approvers. And I think the easier way to move a style guide for a project like the Kubernetes project is to move and educate the approvers. And some progress has been made in that regard. I think a lot of them are paying a lot of attention to the results of the audit and educating themselves. And I do think that'll help us from finding repeats. But, in every audit, you're going to find a repeat. Something's going to slip through and someone's going to make a mistake. And that's why for enterprise software, you run audits regularly. And that's why you have bug finding programs.
True. Okay. So you guys said this was published about 10 months ago? No. You wanted to do a yearly audit. You've got a couple months before we start ramping up on this again. What does volunteer work look like for something like this? What if I decided to get out of bed tomorrow morning and go, I want to help out with this? Is that even possible? Were you taking contributors outside of Atreides and Trailabits and what would that look like? Do you need to be a Kubernetes developer, or support something or some part of it that is going to be tested? What are we looking at here?
I mean, you really want to be asking that question for someone who's a representative of the CNCF, of which neither of us are. But I can give you my opinion on how it should be done. I give that freely.
Okay.
I don't think, as much as I really loved the work that Trail and Atreides Partners did, if I were to run this again in a couple of months, I don't think I would go with them again, because I do think that you want differing perspectives. And I think we would repeat the process from beginning to end. One of the goals we had from the very, very, very beginning was to make the process of selecting a vendor and issuing an RFP and analyzing the proposals, selecting that vendor finally, and then putting together a work product, that all of that was repeatable, which is why all those assets are just sitting on the GitHub repo right now, ready to be picked up and shampooed up and do it all over again. And the working group itself could be reformed and open applications and an open election process for it, just like we did the last time.
Okay.
So I don't think that the whole point of it was to be open.
Okay, cool. Right on. Let me see. Mr. Betcher, Ms. Berlin, do you have anything else? Any other comments?
I have some.
Yes, please.
When y'all mentioned treating it like cattle, my first thought was, okay, you got to vaccinate it right from the get-go. So how much the setup, right? Knowing how to set it up count for security? Yeah, okay. So a lot of the technical code stuff was done, but how much onus is on me as someone who's going to set this up potentially for a company, getting the process down correctly? Count.
I think they were talking about branding.
Oh, wait, who do we get to brand? So
Wow.
I'm with you, Amanda. We'll be branding Mr. Besher. That's your first step to owning a cluster is going to be the hot iron brand. Just if you'll sign this release form right here. So I wanted to speak to this kind of question because I've definitely been involved. I was involved in CIS very early on, and wrote my Bastille Linux and all that project. And so I've been pretty interested in the vaccination problem of cattle for a long time, and I'm definitely of the opinion if we can give all the cattle the I don't know, this isn't very Seattle of me, but if we can give all the cattle a ton of vaccines, I don't mean a ton of vaccines, a ton of antibiotics right into their feed all the time. Like I said, it's not very Seattle. We're more of a Whole Foods kind of city, I guess. But if we can make sure that the very first meal they have, this will get me more Seattle. The very first meal they have is has mother's milk, and we get better configurations. That's definitely going to go well. I mean, so a lot of what I do in my own research or my own tools is focused around saying, okay, you don't know what kind of vulnerabilities are going to be in software that you've bought or gotten for free. So the onus is on you to do the very best you can with it. So to go and configure it really well. There's CIS has a benchmark. Aaron has a great blog post, or a couple of them, I think, at this point. You guys mentioned, I mentioned Jess Frizzell earlier. You guys mentioned, oh gosh, I'm spacing on names, but I'll let you throw some names into the show notes. Great Black Hat talk just happened. Somebody help me out.
Ian,
yes, there you go. So Ian's work. I mentioned Brad Giesman's work the other day. Earlier on this call, but the onus is definitely on you to set up your cluster well, to make if you're using a managed cluster, to still make a good choice of managed cluster, and then configure that well. And that was one of the things, like even with the managed clusters, for those of you who are thinking like, wait, I don't have to do any of that. I'm just going to get a managed cluster. It'll have the best settings. I transfer all of my risk to Aaron over at GKE, because it's on him to make sure that we have the best settings. Even on the managed clusters, you have some personal responsibility and some capability to have a stronger and more resilient setup. I mean, you'll even find to tie this back to the report findings, you'll even find some of the findings basically speak to the defaults and not just to the always behavior. So like one of those was that Kubernetes wasn't giving you enough of an audit trail by default to have non-repudiation, to be able to say this user did this thing, and that's default. You can change that. And just like the whole Mr. Besher, I know that you're into Windows event logging. Just like, the default Windows event log was way, max size was way too small, and you better change that if you want to be able to handle an incident. There's stuff for you to do in Kubernetes. Aaron, I went on for a long time there. I hope you jump into
That's okay. I like what you said. And this is where I have to kind of have some level of split loyalty, right? We're talking about an open source audit that we ran. But on the topic of defaults, on the topic of managed clusters, defaults are hard, especially when you think about them in context of this rapid upgrade that we kind of require of people who use Kubernetes. As someone who runs GKE, right? So a managed cluster as a service, like I would love to go to everyone who has a GKE cluster and just change all their defaults. Just be like, next time you make a cluster, it's going to behave like this. But, I'd get fired because everyone's cluster would break the next time they spun it up. So we talk about this all the time internally, and we have a process whereby we slowly try and pull defaults closer to what we think are better and what we think are more secure. And I'm talking about like a default GKE cluster, not a default Kubernetes cluster. And when we can't just pull the default over because there's bat compat issues or whatever, we publish something in a hardening guide that we publish. And I assume other cloud providers do the same thing, because I need people to start moving themselves by following our guides and by the best practices that get published by various people. And then once that happens, then I can start changing the defaults over. If I have 1% of clusters who are doing something by default that I don't like from a security standpoint, it's much easier than if I have 30 or 40%. That's why I'm always pushing people to go read hardening guides and implement them. And I think the analogy we're going with is hardening guides are vaccines now for new clusters. And I would build on that a little bit more to say that each individual who's trying to manage a bunch of clusters or build a bunch of clusters should have their own little checklist about, like, for my environment, these are the secure defaults that matter to me. Like, I definitely know that I like to run my clusters on, let's just say, Google and Amazon. And I know that they both run this metadata server that's full of pain and suffering if I allow access to it. So I'm going to, no matter where I am, make sure I can check a box that says my workloads can't get to the metadata server. So, that's the default easy attack that everyone likes to give talks about, Jay.
Mm-hmm. By the way, that's yours, Aaron's, for God's sakes, if you nothing else, upgrade your cluster. My competing for God's sakes, if nothing else, is if it's in the cloud, for God's sakes, cut off its access to the metadata API.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you.
Or change it.
Yep. I think I've got 3 different features now that block access to the metadata server.
It's pretty cool.
So Jay, your Bust-a-Kube, after this security audit, has it become more or less secure now that you're using, and assuming the version has been updated in Bust-a-Kube, is it still insecure, or are you just still dwelling on insecure configurations? Or was there things in that you were like, oh yeah, I know that this is a major issue. We need to highlight it in the report.
So I think part of what you're asking is how did Bust-a-Kube either influence our work or get influenced by our work?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna half dodge that question and pivot a different way, like a politician. The stuff I've done with Kubernetes has definitely, influenced my own, influenced some of my experience here. But honestly, so much of the technical work looking for vulnerabilities came out of these 2 fine vendors. The big thing I'll say on Bust-a-Kube, so Bust-a-Kube's an intentionally vulnerable Kubernetes cluster that I use to teach people how to hack and defend Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. And you can download it for free. If enough people download it, you'll drive up my hosting bill, which I highly recommend. No, wait. But I will say when at versions Kubernetes version upgrades, like I had to upgrade it once the cluster got into a year old. I did an upgrade, and when I did, some of the weak defaults, like it became harder to get the insecure configurations that I was counting on, and I was pretty peeved at that. I think I ended up making one of my pull requests against the Kubernetes documentation was to correct something to say, hey, this default unfortunately is no longer default. It doesn't work like this anymore. And I found that out not from, not academically, but rather because it broke my damn open source project.
Oh.
So it was pretty neat.
Why stay insecure. Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. So you guys mentioned CIS benchmarks. Are those, are you, or did this, are they working with you, or are they making changes to the next version of CIS benchmarks to make sure that the colostrum, which is the mother's milk in this case, is being secured, or for the next generation or the next version of CIS?
So
the CIS benchmark
really quickly. Rory did. Oh,
Go ahead,
sorry, Aaron, hit it.
Okay, I'll go.
Yeah, thanks.
The CIS benchmark is an open process. You can contribute tomorrow if you want to.
Oh.
And that's really cool. There are some people that I work with that are more involved than others. One of the challenges that I run into with the benchmark isn't in the quality of it. It's a great benchmark, and it gets better with every version, and they're definitely in touch with the Kubernetes experts, at least internal to Google, as well as I know they work closely with Rory, who's at NCC right now, to make sure that they're correct. The problem is that they're not universally applicable. So the trouble that people run into when they run the benchmarks is they get some reds and some oranges and a bunch of greens, and they go, okay, I'm done when everything red or orange is green. And that's going to be very different depending on the individual threat model of the applications that you're running or the environment that it's running in.
Right.
As a cavalier example, like on a managed service like GKE, we run the master control plane for you, right? Like you don't have any access to it other than through the APIs. So and the infrastructure that runs it is different than it would be if you're running it on-prem or if you were running it on compute, that's on some cloud provider. So a lot of the findings are just not applicable. And the same would be true if you were running in an air-gapped environment, or if you were running some incredibly sensitive software. You would definitely have a different level of security or trust that you would need, and each benchmark may or may not apply. So I would say it's a great benchmark as long as you actually read it and go in depth on it. If you just try and turn all the red to green, you're going to have a bad time. That
makes sense.
That's certainly been the case in all the hardening efforts ever. It's kind of the I was one of the three first technical advisors at CIS, and worked on one of the first benchmarks there. And one of the concerns we always had was like, we have to make sure you can get a perfect score and actually still have a system that you can log into at all. So like Aaron said, you have to be reading it. I will say, to answer your original question about whether the benchmark is taking our input, Rory McCune and Liz Rice lead the Kubernetes benchmark, and Rory wrote shortly after, within a day of our releasing this, he wrote publicly that he was starting to take it in, that he was starting to take it in and figure out how the benchmark was going to change in response to the work.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. Yeah, I didn't start out with the CIS benchmarks. I started out with Windows Gold disks and Platinum disks. And if you tried to run a lot of that stuff on an existing system like a domain controller and tried to go to Platinum, quote unquote, you would brick your DC, which we found out back in the day. It would no longer be able to join the domain, and if you did it to both DCs at the same time, you'd be SOL. So definitely make. Well, Navy being what it is, DISA likes screwing things up. So apologies to our DISA listeners. Wow. Okay. So
wait, we have those?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a few listeners here, so hopefully they're starting to use Kubernetes as well. So,
Good.
Mr. Betcher, Ms. Berlin, do you have any other questions? Because I think we need to let these gentlemen get out of their respective areas.
I'm good.
Okay. All right. So, Aaron, I'll start with you. Do you go to conferences? And if so, are you going to be at any soon that we'll be able to see you at?
Yes, I do go to conferences. I feel like I'm still recovering from this year's DEF CON. The next one I'll be at for sure is HushCon here in Seattle.
Okay. Yeah, me too. Right on. Okay.
Great.
Mr. J, Mr. Beale, how about you? Are you going to be at HushCon as well?
I'll be at HushCon. I too am still think that we're all just dreaming, and that I'm dreaming, and we're all actually at DEF CON right now.
Ew.
I did see you pass in the hallway, but we were both like on a mission.
Yeah. I think I might have signed up for a few too many things at DEF CON, but I'll be at my next couple are I'm going back to Vegas for Splunk's conference, for SplunkConf, and then I know I'm going to attend KubeCon.
Okay.
Right. Oh, right. I'll be at KubeCon too. In fact, I'm probably speaking there.
I'm probably speaking with him.
Damn.
You're right. Okay.
I'll have to find out when that one is, because...
San Diego in what month, Aaron?
November.
Oh, crap.
November,
right?
That's really nice too.
Yeah. That was it. I was trying to convince my wife that it'd be a good vacation, and she said, "Going with you to a conference is not what I imagine a vacation to be." So I think we were talking about going to San Diego twice. Like, we'll go down there, and then I'll stay for an extra week.
Oh, 18th through the 21st. It's the weekend before Thanksgiving, so you got that going for you too. So it's a nice place.
Oh boy.
I used to live there, so yeah, it's a nice area to be in at that time of year. So, wow. Okay.
Well, it's WorkCon territory.
That's right. Cool. All right. So, Miss Berlin, tell us how people can get a hold of you and Hackers Health and all that. And
so on Twitter is easiest, or in our BreakSec Slack channel, at Infosister, INFOSYSTIR, or at Hackers Health.
Okay. Mr. Betcher, how about you?
At BetcherPwned on Twitter, or my website, log-md.com.
And log-md is what, some kind of tool or something?
Yeah, some kind of tool that I'm actually working on a hunting feature right now.
Oh,
ooh, fancy.
So basically, if you find an artifact on one system, you can ask your entire environment, who else has this artifact?
I've been meaning to ask you about some pre-IPO stock. Could I get in on some of that? Maybe for cheap or whatever. Cool. Aaron, I didn't ask you and Jay about how people get a hold of you. What's the best way to get a hold of you, Aaron? And then I'll ask Jay that question.
I mean, I guess Twitter is what the cool kids are doing now, right?
Right.
Yep.
It was for Hugged, because I think we all that's a fine place to get a hold of me. I'm moderately active.
Okay, that's Atlas Hugged. We'll have it in the show notes. Okay, cool. We'll have that in the show notes. Jay, how about you?
I'm at J Beale and adding Guardians.
Okay, cool. All right, so feel free to drop off if you guys need to, but we appreciate you, both of you coming on, and you're always welcome to come back on. We may yet have some more discussion about Kubernetes, and we would love to pick y'all's brains about coming on and discussing some of the finer points of Kubernetes if we get any major releases. So appreciate both of you for coming on.
So much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Right on. All right. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thanks, Jay. Have a good night. Anyway, so the podcast is listener supported currently, and we have a Patreon, and we thank all of our Patreon donors for their many of them for years of support. Even $1 goes towards hosting fees. We're actually looking now at moving all of the various properties that myself and Matt Domko and Wendy Knox Everett have started, including the local CSEC East meetup and the podcast and the conference under the InfoSec Education Foundation umbrella. So just a little aside. So we're trying to figure out how to do all that legally without going to white collar prison. I understand they have conjugal visits there, but that. Anyway, so
still, you don't want to have to deal with that.
Right. So, we appreciate all the help from our patrons. They actually bought pizza for everybody at our conference, which was great. And if you're interested in supporting us, the podcast will always be free, but we definitely need, it's not cheap time and effort and hosting fees and everything to pay, it costs money. So we appreciate everybody's help on that. We have a TPub store. You can go and get a T-shirt with our logo on it. You can actually still buy a T-shirt with Miss Berlin's face on it.
Oh, yeah. I expect to see everyone at DerbyCon wearing one.
I wanted to buy one, but I ran out of time.
I'll give you a special present if you have one.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Damn it. Now I'm sorry I didn't get one, but...
it's really just a BreakSec sticker. It's fine.
Oh. Okay.
But you can have a whole pack.
I hope so, because I didn't order anymore. So we actually have the InfoSec Campout T-shirt is on there too. You can order it as a T-shirt or a mug or a sticker. We have some stickers from InfoSec Campout still available. I'll be bringing those along to DerbyCon. And so you can go to tpublic.com/user/BDS_podcast. The link's in the show notes. I really should start remembering that, but yeah.
I have to look it up every time.
Yeah, me too. At least it's on breakingsecurity.com, BRAKEING security.com. So our Twitter for the podcast is BreakSec, BRAKESEC. You can follow me on Twitter at BrianBrake, BRYANBRAKE. We're on TuneIn Radio, iTunes. Our standing has actually gone up quite a bit recently on iTunes because of word of mouth. So every time you put in a comment about how good or not sucky we are, we get a little more exposure.
You know that our Slack channel is almost up to 2,000 people?
Nuh-uh. Really?
We're at 1939.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, I didn't tell Jay or Aaron that we actually have a Kubernetes channel, or we call it Container and VM or CloudSec. We have various channels for various topics. So we have a blue team. We have a BDS podcast one. We have the Hallway Con because we kind of like to treat the Slack as like a forever conference kind of thing. So, you've got your Hallway Con where people go in and talk, and we have a social contract. So if you're worried about, codes of conduct or whatever, we have that, and we do vigorously enforce that. Am I missing anything? Patreon, T-shirts, DerbyCon. Bring your appetite. We're going to have chicken and waffles pizza if you're coming.
It was so good last time.
I know. I'm going to have to figure out how to not bust my keto and still have, 8 pieces of chicken and waffles pizza. So
I'm just going to not eat until then.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
And many other kinds.
Intermittent fasting and then a whole pizza. That is my diet.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because somebody asked earlier if we were going to listen to the show, and we'll probably talk about it at the DerbyCon show. I'm going to do part 1, and then this will be at the end of part 2. But I felt weird like the week after the conference. It was like I was unable to make a decision, or it felt like I was constantly fatigued on Monday and Tuesday. Somebody told me I had like a cortisol overload or something like that. And since there was no more pressure or no more stress of conference, it was like, it's like being off a drug or something. It took days to withdraw.
Right.
So yeah, it was a little weird. I'm still kind of, I slept, I think almost 12 hours on Sunday. Even took a nap, which I don't normally do. So, but that was a good time. I flew my drone for the first time.
Nice.
Yeah, we set up a hacker network, and we had to get the line over like a really large BlackBerry patch. And if my drone had crashed into the BlackBerry patch, it would have been a permanent fixture in the BlackBerry patch because you don't walk inside of a BlackBerry patch. So, we managed to fly it about 90 feet across over to the walkway, and it went really well. We got the network set up with the Ubiquiti AP and everything. I think we are going to do it again next year. We're going to try to get a little bit bigger. I
hope to make it next year.
Okay. Well, we do have some tentative dates. So, Mr. Betcher, if you want to join us, several people did say, "Hey, is Mr. Berlin or Mr. Betcher going to be here?" I was like, "No, sadly, they don't live here." And some of them were genuinely surprised. They're like, "Oh, I thought they lived here in this area," and I was like, "No."
It's weird. People ask me, "So, do you guys like meet up to record?" I'm like, I mean, over the internet.
Yeah, over the internet. Right. Yeah.
There's a very large triangle between our.
It's a very large triangle.
Yeah. So it was interesting, but it was definitely fun. Adam Baldwin from NPM, who we had on the show, came and talked about some of the things that they've been doing there to try to increase security, and that was nice. The disaster preparedness discussion that we did with April Murdoch was fantastic. Learning how you can use a ham radio in emergencies, or understanding how to make Go kits, and how much food you should have in the event of an emergency, especially up here in the Pacific Northwest, where they said if we have another 7.0 or better earthquake, we could be without power for a couple of weeks. So that those things were good to hear. Not even from a business point of view or whatever. It was just like a personal safety kind of thing. So very, very nice, very interesting discussions. And I'm looking forward to having an even bigger event next year. So. Everybody set their calendars for sometime around the end of August. We'll be announcing some things in the next few weeks. We're gonna sit down and have our lessons learned, because I definitely made some mistakes. I didn't delegate well, and as good as everybody says it was, if I'd had probably delegated a few things out, the conference would have been that much better, I think. So there's definitely some mistakes I made. We overbought food because everybody bought food for themselves, and we bought food for about 35 to 40 people. So I mean, we made massive donations to the Black Lodge, which was one of our sponsors, Black Lodge Hackerspace up here in Seattle, and of course my company Leviathan was a silver sponsor. So I took my Leviathan hat off and was telling Marcella and Frank I thanked them for being a sponsor of they didn't have to do that, just because I worked for them, but it was very much appreciated. So, free advertising. We don't do that often, but that's as close to a sponsor as the podcast has gotten so far as Leviathan Security. So, appreciate them helping out. So, all right. Well, this was a supersized episode. Appreciate you coming on, Miss Berlin, and I will see you.
People are still listening.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so.
Yeah. Really?
Maybe. Somewhat. Mr. Betcher, when do you get in? Because you and I are in the same hotel room at Derby.
I have to check my flight.
Okay.
In the evening.
In the evening?
Late evening, I'm sure.
Okay.
I leave Austin in the afternoon, so.
Okay. I leave at like 7 in the morning here to Seattle, and I get in like 5 on Tuesday night. If you're listening to I'll put something at the beginning of part 1. I'm gonna be there for like 2 days without you two. So
I get in Wednesday evening.
I get in Tuesday night. I'm starting class Wednesday morning.
One day.
Oh yeah. Well, anyway, all right, everybody. If you're a Derby, I hope you had a great time, and I hope you got to meet us, and I hope we surpassed your wildest dreams. So.
Totally.
Yeah, not disappointed in any way. So, all right. Well, that was it for Breaking Down Security. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming back on, Mr. Betcher, Mr. Berlin. Appreciate y'all coming on. Everyone, have a great week. Be nice to one another. Take care of yourselves, because you're only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.